Yo, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in to Technical Tuesdays. This is going to be a quick and dirty video, so I'll get right into it. This past week, I've been working on focusing on macroeconomics and electrical engineering. On the economic front, I sort of started out with going over the simplified circular flow model, looking at how the product and factor markets between businesses and households interact. So, looking at how goods and services are traded from businesses to household, and then household gives sales to business, and then in the factor market, looking at rent, wages, interest, profits, and how they're traded from businesses to household in exchange for land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So just going over the actors in the flow model, looking at how the payments are transferred, looking at leakages and injections, just kind of getting familiar with that model as a framework for macroeconomics. And then I kind of moved on to looking at the business cycle. So the four stages of the business cycle: expansion, creation of an inflationary gap, contraction, and then the trough following a recession or the recessionary gap. So looking at those, being able to recognize indicators of what stage you are in the business cycle, whether they be indicators or lagging indicators, and just understanding the power of using GDP, unemployment, CPI, inflation rates as explanatory instruments in explaining, why we hit a certain stage in the economy or why we were seeing various outcomes at certain stages. Then I moved on to learning about GDP. So looking at the three methods of calculating GDP: output expenditure model, value added model, and income model, making sure I understand the assumptions required to get an output in each method of calculating GDP, and then understanding why GDP isn't necessarily a good standard of the health of an economy because of a varied number of factors, including non-market activity, distribution of wealth, unequal distributions of wealth, underground economies. Those kinds of things are all, influences on the overall economy, but don't necessarily come up when you're looking at things that analyze GDP. So that segued into learning about GDP deflators, CPI, getting a better understanding of inflation, and how we are able to calculate inflation, looking at GDP deflator and CPI, looking at real versus nominal GDP, and then some of the problems that come with using CPI as an instrument to measure inflation, such as substitution bias, quality change bias, and new goods bias, right? So in some instances, if the prices of goods are raised way too high, people will buy substitute goods that may not be present in the CPI, in the subset of products that the CPI looks at. So which would cause the CPI to underestimate the GDP or underestimate the impact of inflation. Similar things with the quality change bias. Changes in quality of goods aren't always reflected in the CPI, and consumer spending habits can change, and that might not be reflected in CPI as well. What else? I think that's pretty much it. I went over unemployment, labor force, production possibilities. All these things are like rudimentary stuff that you'll learn in AP Macro or your first year college economics course. But because I'm about a year removed, it's good to kind of get my feet wet, kind of get a little bit more familiar with the territory and refresh things in my mind. So that's what I covered on the economics front. On the engineering front, I went back to electrical. I felt like my understanding of mechanics, physics, dynamics of mechanical systems, all that stuff is pretty strong. So I wanted to start with more unfamiliar territory. And so what that looked like was getting back into RC circuits, resistant capacitor circuits, RLC circuits, resistance inductor capacitor circuits, looking at op amp circuit, rudimentary op amp circuits, being able to calculate, resistances, voltages, currents across various elements or nodes on the circuit. And then I also briefly got into looking at measuring transfer functions and looking at three-phase power calculation. So looking at three-phase power systems, being able to calculate the two different types of power, the real power and then also the complex power. So other than that, I just kind of a note on, how I'm feeling after kind of adopting this schedule. It's definitely been challenging to be able to sufficiently dedicate time to study these concepts and make sure that I'm, not just getting bored and, passively learning. I'm trying to be as active and intentional as possible. And over the course of the week, I've noticed that energy levels have definitely been dipping. I've been pushing myself a little bit harder on my morning runs, and I feel like that has resulted in me kind of hitting my energy wall sooner in the day, which means that I'm much more tired and irritable and bored and less disciplined. And so sometimes that looks like me taking a back seat in being an active learner. So that's something that I'm cognizant of, I'm aware of, and I'm working on navigating those obstacles. But I feel like it's important to mention because it has impacted, my overall progress. But that aside, that's going to be it for Technical Tuesdays. I just wanted this series to serve as kind of a recap of stuff that I've been learning in the more technical sense. For now, I'm going to kind of constrain things to economics and engineering, but as I kind of get more comfortable, get more familiar, add more things into the toolkit, things will expand, and you guys can look forward to that. If you guys have suggestions for things that I might find interesting or should consider looking into sort of on a technical level, as always, feel free to let me know in the comments. Looking forward to kind of getting some community engagement on that front. And then also we have Wildcard Wednesday tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to dedicate it to music again, but in a different capacity. I've been playing around with Reaper, which is a digital audio workstation. So just kind of playing around in Reaper and figuring out what goes into producing music theory, what things you kind of have to think about when you're constructing melodies, when you're designing, I wouldn't say designing beats, but rhythms, and how you synthesize all that in something that sounds good. And so there's a lot of established theory and math that goes into that I didn't necessarily know about going into it. And I think, dedicating a video to that will be interesting, at least for now, since don't really have anybody giving me recommendations or commenting on things that they want to hear from me about. So until I get that input, I'm just going to keep on dedicating Wildcard Wednesdays to stuff that I'm into, and music is really what's been tapping my interest, tickling my fancy as of late. So once again, thank you guys. Appreciate you for tuning in, and I'll touch base with you tomorrow. As always, stay juicy, stay sexy.